All right, so today we're going deep on a concept that I think a lot of us can relate to. You know that feeling of just being a cog in the machine?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like you're just going through the motions.
Exactly. Whether it's at work or even just like in your day-to-day life. And it's interesting because the term for this is apparatchik. Like a blindly devoted follower. And that's kind of the jumping off point for our deep dive today.
Right, yeah, and I think it ties into this bigger question of what really gives our lives meaning.
Yeah,
Like, how do we find that purpose?
totally. And speaking of purpose, the sources we're looking at today dive into this whole idea of repetition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they make this distinction between two types of repetition. The first one is like when you keep doing something because you truly believe in it.
Right, you're intrinsically motivated.
Exactly. But then there's this other kind of repetition where you're doing something just to survive, just to buy.
Ah, yeah. I see where you're going with this.
And the sources suggest that even though that second kind of repetition, the one driven by external factors, might feel safe at first.
It can be a trap.
Yeah, it can be a trap. Like in the long run, it can actually lead to a loss of meaning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So basically, while that need for security, that extrinsic motivation is really important, the sources suggest that if it's the only thing driving you, well, your sense of purpose can really start to fade over time.
And they actually use a pretty interesting analogy to illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
They compare it to arranged marriages or relationships that are built solely on those kinds of external factors, things like social pressure or financial stability. It's like those relationships might start out stable, but without that strong internal connection, without that love and shared values, they can really struggle.
That's a great point. So I guess the key takeaway here is to really figure out what kind of repetition is dominating your life, right? Are you doing things because you genuinely believe in them? Or are you just going through the motions because you feel like you have to?
Totally. And that brings us to another big idea from the sources, this concept of spring.
Spring, like the season.
Right. Exactly. So in this context, spring is being used as a metaphor for those periods in our lives when we're full of potential, like when we have the energy and opportunity to pursue what really matters to us.
I like that. So those times when we can really plant the seeds for growth and new beginnings.
Exactly. And it's in this context that the sources bring in a really powerful quote from Leo Tolstoy. I actually jotted it down because I thought it was so impactful. It says, in the meantime, if the opportunity comes knocking, we should do what we can press forward. With mortality against our side, the spring will not last forever and should make our lives matter to be what we believe it should be.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, right? And it really emphasizes that these spring periods don't last forever.
Yeah, there's a real urgency there. It's like a call to action. Don't let those opportunities pass you by.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the whole idea of being an apparatchik comes back into play. If we're so caught up in just being a cog in the machine, if we're only motivated by external pressures, we might miss those spring moments entirely.
Right, we might not even recognize them when they're happening.
And then before we know it, those opportunities have passed us by and we're left wondering what could have been.
So what do we do? How do we make sure we're making the most of those spring times?
Well, I think the first step is being really honest with ourselves about why we're doing what we're doing. Are we pursuing things that we genuinely care about? Or are we just going through the motions? And then once we've done that self-reflection, we need to be proactive. We need to actively look for those spring opportunities and be willing to take risks to pursue them.
And I think that's a really important point because sometimes those opportunities might not be obvious. They might require us to step outside of our comfort zones or challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. But I think that's where the real magic happens, when we're brave enough to embrace those moments of spring and really make our lives matter.
This all makes me think, where are you operating mostly on autopilot? Like, what are those areas in your life where you might be settling for extrinsic motivation when you could be striving for something more?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's not always easy to answer, but it's so worth asking. Because ultimately, it's about figuring out how to live a life that's true to ourselves, a life that's aligned with our values and our passions.
It's about making sure that we're not just a cog in the machine, but that we're actually the ones driving the machine,
Yeah.
choosing our own direction.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by doing that, we can inspire others to do the same, to find their own spring and make their lives matter.
And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive today.
That was a good one. A lot to think about.
Definitely. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.